Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, Zara, I will pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Hunter, for that lovely introduction. Joy, I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. So we're going to kick it off with our first question for you, which is, what really influenced your career aspirations in sports journalism?
Well, I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And if you know anything about Pittsburgh, sports are, I don't want to call it a cult, but you are kind of assigned sports fandom at birth. So I grew up around a lot of people who are very passionate about sports. The sports teams are a big part of the community. It's kind of our love language, how we speak to each other. Oh, talking about the Steelers or complaining about the Pirates. And high school football is a big thing there as well. And I grew up playing sports also. So a lot of my heroes growing up were sports figures. A lot of the inspiration and confidence that I got came from playing sports. And I'm an opinionated individual, so it all kind of came together. And I have that original, that broadcasting origin story of doing the newscast with the hairbrush and the mirror, and for your family, that's kind of like, well, we all have that same story. But I just grew up around sports. It's in my blood. It's in what I do, and it shaped a great deal of my early life and my journey. I ran track, played basketball, soccer, and volleyball, and then was recruited to play soccer and run track in college. I ended up running track in college, so I have just a sports background personally, and I wanted to make that into a career.
I love that. Wow, you did all of the sports.
I was definitely a jock for sure.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And I also love what you said about sports really giving you confidence. I think that's like such an important thing that sometimes we don't talk about. So I love that you mentioned that as well. So it makes sense that you ended up where you are just with all of that like background. So I would love to hear from you. I know we heard in the introduction that things are changing in the industry. In what ways has equity and inclusion in the TV and radio industry changed since you entered?
Well, I think the business is much different than when I started. I mean, I had my first internship in the business 15 years ago, which is kind of crazy to say, but it goes fast. And when I started in the business, I had no female mentors whatsoever. I didn't have any or very few Black mentors. So diversity in front of the camera and behind the camera, or in radio, on camera, behind the camera, or behind the mic, I should say, it was very limited. And it didn't keep me from seeing myself in those spaces because it was something that I wanted, but it really made it difficult for other people to see me in those spaces, because what I was trying to do really hadn't been done in the market before. And when there's no women, when there's no Black women, and you're pushing for an on-air job in a space where that doesn't exist, it's harder for other people to think that you can do it. Which, when we think about what this job is, it's really quite silly. But when the representation isn't there, it's difficult to convince people of that. And so the representation has changed quite a bit for the positive. We see more women in sports spaces, on air, behind the camera, in executive spaces, more Black women, more Black people. And to me, as much as I truly believe in representation on camera and front-facing representation, I also believe that the storytelling and the storytellers need to reflect that as well. So when you walk onto set or you walk into a studio, that you don't just see diverse talent, but you also see diverse producers and diverse crews, because everyone helps to shape what is told through the media in the building. And if there's only representation in one space, it makes it very difficult to do that. And you do find that narratives can come out quite a bit different when someone's helping to tell the story who doesn't have those experiences at all. So I have definitely seen a great deal of growth over the years in those spaces. We have a long way to go, but I definitely see more now. And I've come up through the business with a pretty solid group of broadcasters, and particularly Black women. And it's sort of amazing. And we talk about it, like when we came in the business, we only had each other. We didn't have anyone to reach up to, really. And the access was different, obviously, as well. You have much more access to people through email and chats like this, and conferences and social media, and all of that really didn't exist at the time. So all of those shifts have helped bring people together as well, as far as mentorship goes. But yes, I mean, it's very different through a lot of work of a lot of people that came before me. And I still think we have quite a ways to go.
You said so many powerful things. What a true trailblazer. It's such a pleasure to have you here, Joy. And I think I really love what you said about, it's not just about the diverse talent, right? It's about everyone who's involved in crafting the story and making sure that there's representation there. And really something that you said that was so powerful that I'm still resonating with is, the fact that lack of representation didn't stop you from being able to see yourself in that space, but it stopped others from being able to see you in that space. That's such a powerful kind of statement that I haven't quite thought about before, but it's so true. And I so appreciate you naming that, right? The limitations that other folks have of what we can do sometimes then has an impact on what the opportunities that we're given. So thank you for naming that and bringing that into the space as well. So, I mean, you already talked about a few changes that are happening, especially around representation in the industry, but what other changes will the sports broadcasting industry need to make in order to create spaces where Black professionals can thrive?
Yeah, I think the shift for me now, while we do still need to have more diversity on camera and more diversity in the storytelling space, I think there needs to be more diversity in the executive space, because the hirings trickle down from obviously the top. So, we know all of the trends and statistics on hiring people that look like you and come from the same spaces as you. And I think in order to really shake that up and make colossal change forward, there needs to be more diversity at the top, because the decision makers not only set the tone for organizations, but they do the hiring of the showrunners, and then the showrunners do the hiring of this, and so on and so forth. And so while, people can make individual changes, and those are important and influential to what we're talking about, I think in order for there to be a massive shakeup, there needs to be more hiring of diversity at the top. So, I talk about this a lot in sports and what I do every day. And when we talk about organizations that are well run, I always go to, who owns the team, who is the GM, who is the coach, what does the coaching staff look like, how does the leaders on the team, how do they lead? Because I believe that that's how it goes. Obviously, people can have good culture within the workspace, but it's much easier to do that when the tone is set at the top, and when you can see at the top and see yourself and see diversity and see that this is something that the company cares about. So to me, I think that's a massive step that I would like to see as well.
I think that's so important, because a lot of times the leaders of a company, of a sports team, they're setting the tone, right? Of like how everyone else is operating. And so that's a great point as well, that we can't just be seeing the changes happen on the bottom levels. We have to be able to see them happening at the top levels as well. So last year, you established a scholarship for Barry University students pursuing a bachelor's degree in communications. You noted that at the time, a personal goal of yours is to foster diversity in the industry. And we've been talking about that thus far, which is really powerful. In addition to financial support through scholarships and grants, what other initiatives can industry leaders and academic programs embrace in order to support the next generation of journalists and broadcasters?
So I think it's very important to be accessible to the next generation, which is part of the reason why I wanted to establish the scholarship. I mean, one reason was I was able to benefit from applying to, partial scholarships when I was in school, and as we know, student loans are quite the thing. So, everything helps. And those really helped me applying for all those scholarships and, being able to gain access to them from being at my school. So I think outside of that, being available to the next generation, doing mentorship programs, doing talks like this. One thing I really feel like is important to students is for them to really not only see themselves in the space, but understand what that space entails. I think for me, while I did have a formal education, I didn't have a financial education. I didn't understand at all what was going to happen after I got out of school, and how much money I was going to make, and how long it was going to be before I would only work one job. Like all of that kind of information is not really that readily available, at least in my business, to students, and for them to see what they'll be doing every day, what kind of steps they need to take to prepare themselves for graduation. I think all of those things can be done in a very, one-on-one way, and in a macro sense, just providing access to young people. That was something I didn't have. Not that would have changed, my path, but knowledge is power, and some things are just not in textbooks. And that's what's so powerful about mentorship and guidance, and having people that look like you giving that mentorship. Like I said, I had mentors. They were all men, and almost all of them were not Black. So there's just a conversation gap about certain things that you may be going through or experiencing that you really can't ask for advice on, because they're not going through the same thing that you are. So I think that, taking the initiative when you get opportunities to advance, to pass that information along, to not gatekeep, your knowledge from the next generation is important. And also, I think, making people feel comfortable in the space they're in is, just because I experience something doesn't mean that the next person should have to experience it or will experience it. So, that's the point, to make the place better for the next person that comes along, if you can. So all of those things, I think, play a role in really advancing business, really advancing spaces, and particularly spaces that don't have a lot of diversity. Access to me, I think, is very important.
Absolutely. I think what you said is so powerful around the lack of financial education. That's really big for students. Again, not fully understanding, like you said, student loans, what that entails, what comes after college. Like you said, the sort of, your path took you a little bit of time before you could work just one job. This is the type of information, I think, that, like you said, is not readily available or being readily provided, to younger folks. So I think that's a really powerful sort of thing for us to be keeping in mind. And, even at Power to Fly, we often talk about like the importance of mentorship. So I love that you brought that up as well, because I do think, again, it's difficult to get like the most effective mentorship from folks that may not be having the same lived experience as you, so when you have folks who look like you or have similar sort of experiences, then they can like help you kind of navigate those different pieces, so I love that you brought in mentorship, which I think can be such a powerful game changer for some folks, but a lot of times it's not available because the folks aren't there who can actually like provide that mentorship. So
Exactly.
I love that you kind of shared that. And I also want to invite folks that are watching this, if you have any questions, please drop them into the chat. We'd love to be able to kind of hear what folks are thinking about and get those questions to Joy as well. So Joy, the Joy Taylor Foundation is a nonprofit serving the homeless, survivors of domestic violence, and promoting education and youth empowerment in the communities of Los Angeles, Miami, Pittsburgh, and New York City. Can you speak about the organization's mission and impact, and how can people really get involved and support?
So I was very heavily involved in the community in Miami when I was working down there, and community service has been a part of my life since I was very young. And I wanted to sort of streamline all of the efforts that I was participating in, and kind of give people the space to be able to help as well. And so that's why I started the foundation. I'm a survivor of domestic violence, And obviously homelessness is very much linked to domestic violence, but also is a massive problem around the country, and particularly here in Los Angeles, and in New York, and in all of the major cities. And then youth empowerment obviously is something that ties into all of those things as well. So for me, I really wanted to give people a platform and use my platform to help elevate other organizations and, bring them to my audience, introduce people that are doing great work in the community to my audience, and also, give what I can back to the community. So it took me a long time, but I was eventually very vocal through actually my work. I don't know what I'm missing, but maybe it was about 10 years ago now, where I finally spoke about my domestic violence experience. And through having that conversation publicly, which is obviously not the easiest thing to do, I found that, a lot of the conversations about that particular topic, about homelessness, were not really very informed. And these are very nuanced and difficult subjects to get into. So I wanted to be able to give people, awareness of what was going on in their communities when it comes to that as well. So we partnered with some pretty amazing organizations that are doing really great work. And if people want to help, currently, you can always donate to any of the organizations that we're partnered with through their page, which is listed on the Joy Taylor Foundation. And you can, follow and support. And anytime that we have new news or events coming up or initiatives, we'll be able to push that out to you so that you can help support.
Wow, Joy, thank you, first of all, for being transparent, for being vulnerable around your own experiences, and for really utilizing that to kind of have a foundation that's really working against that, right? And really supporting survivors. I think that's so powerful and so beautiful. So thank you for that. And it sounds like amazing work. So folks, if you're not currently familiar with the Joy Taylor Foundation, please do look it up, look at the different organizations they're partnering with, and let's make sure that we're supporting this amazing work. So we have a question for you from the audience, Joy. So someone is asking, how have Black sports journalists been able to showcase the diversity and complexity of the sports world?
Well, I think when you come from a different space, when you have a different experience and come from a different community, you are able to cover the people that look like you in a different way and have conversations that other people who are not from that group can have. And I think we saw a lot of that over the past couple of years, particularly with the murder of George Floyd. There were a lot of conversations being had publicly that really hadn't been able to be had in the complexities and nuances that they were being had, particularly around sports, because that shook up the whole world. And it very much, like everything in society does, because sports is just a microcosm of society, spilled over into sports. And our sports leaders were very vocal about it. And I'm just focusing on the George Floyd murder as an example of how this is exhibited. And, being able to be in those spaces and have those conversations publicly on our platforms, as Black journalists, as Black broadcasters, was very impactful, because those are not often the conversations that we're having in those spaces. If you're a news station, or you're, a culture show, or even a pop culture show, you can get into those topics more seamlessly. And I've never subscribed to the idea that sports and social issues were separate. I mean, if you go back to the beginning of competition, they've always been linked. Any kind of formal competition is linked to what's going on in society at that time. I mean, look at the Olympics, just as a small example of some of the social stands and community issues that have been exhibited on a very public international space. So there's often pushback at the idea that sports and social issues, or Black issues, or women's rights, or any of these topics that we talk about that are necessarily not linked to sports, shouldn't be linked to sports. But sports has always been a platform for expression, and it's almost always been a conduit to move society forward. I mean, Muhammad Ali is obviously an iconic athlete, but you can't tell Muhammad Ali's story without mentioning his activism. And that was quite a while ago, and his activism was very important to society and to the civil rights movement. So, being a Black journalist, being a Black broadcaster in those spaces has been very important to help tell the story. And history is something that is very important to me. I think it is a massive problem in our society, in American society. Just the mention of history. I mean, we're seeing a lot of erasure happening around the country with history, and it's scary because that is what broadcasters do. That's what we help to do, and the media does is help to write history. And so having people of diversity in those spaces is paramount to that. And it all very much ties together. We don't have enough time to get into all of it today, but those are just some examples of the breakthroughs that have happened that are linked to sports, and having Black broadcasters in those spaces to help tell those stories, and the power of that.
Yeah, something we talk a lot about in like the DEIB world is the power of storytelling. And I love what you even started off with, talking about how our own experiences, our own identities inform a lot of how we then share our story. And so I think that that's so powerful, that what you're saying about the erasure of history, right? The folks who are writing the history get to have the power, right, of what is actually shared. And so if we're in it, if we're able to kind of share the story, now we have the power to shape that narrative, which I think is so important. And I really love that you were able to bring that here, because I do think it's really important to be the folks that are actually sharing the story and not just being written into the story, right? So another final question for you from the audience. I know that we have just a few minutes left here. Someone's asking, what challenges do Black sports journalists face, especially when they're covering predominantly white events?
Yeah, I think some of the challenges are I've already mentioned throughout the talk. One, just breaking into the space if you've never had that opportunity before. I mean, there are not a lot of women in my particular space, which would be, sports opinion. And there are even fewer Black women in that space, just around the entire, spectrum of sports media. So again, being able to see Black people in those spaces for advancement, like hiring and moving up and all of those things, but also for representation, to people who are watching it. I think some challenges come up when there are incidents that don't reflect diversity, when you're watching, a space that has very little diversity in it. It can be very difficult, to explain the importance of that when people are watching something that isn't representative. For example, it's often a conversation about head coaches and the limited amount of Black head coaches. Just, we'll just stick with the NFL. There's very few, and the sport is predominantly Black, but you're watching a sport that is coached by predominantly white men. And the challenges that come with expressing the urgency of that to people who aren't understanding what kind of message that sends when you have this massive group, majority group of players being Black, but then majority of the coaches and people that make the hires and people that influence the representation of the organization being predominantly white. So there are definitely challenges in expressing those things in spaces to people who don't understand the issues of that. And again, that's why it's so important to have diversity in all of the spaces, in all of the levels: executive, producing, on camera, social media, at every level. Diversity is not something that it's just like, it's a word that gets thrown around. Some people don't really understand the impact of it and the importance of it. And having diversity also helps you have a well-rounded company that's not sending a message to one group of people. And I think being a Black broadcaster and Black female broadcaster, that's something that I always like to throw a pin into people. Like, you are not just talking to people that look like you. You're not just talking to people that come from where you come from. There is a whole audience of people out there in the world. So if you only hire people that look like you, if you only are concerned about talking to people that look like you, if you're only concerned about supporting that, you're also leaving out a massive audience. And we're here, and we want to, not just to be represented and spoken to, but to have the story told. So it can definitely be a challenge in that space, but it's moving forward, and we have more shaking up to do.
I love that. I love diversity is not just like a word, it has very real impacts. So thank you so much, Joy, for being here, for being so open about your own experiences, the challenges you have, the vision that you have, the mission between your organization, all the work you're doing. I love it. I am definitely inspired. I'm sure that the rest of the folks who are watching this are also just as inspired. And I just want to say thank you so much for being here, sharing your story. And I can't wait to see how the industry continues to be shaken up by folks like yourself.
Thank you so much. You were wonderful. And thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful to talk to all of you.
Thank you both, Joy and Zara. Excuse me. Joy, for all those football fans out there, I think you're maybe participating in anchoring just a small thing happening soon, right? What's that thing called?
Yes, it's called the Super Bowl.
Yes, that's it. Yes.
It's a small deal. I'm leaving for the Super Bowl after our show today. So we're doing our broadcasts on Thursday and Friday from outside of the stadium. So like, this is our Super Bowl also.
Yeah.
In the business. So I'm heading out. I'm heading out later this afternoon. So I'm very excited. I'm hoping for a very good game. And I don't know who I'm picking yet, so you'll have to watch Friday to find out. I actually don't know yet, but I'm very excited for the game.
Awesome. Well, we'll be tuning in. Thank you so much, Joy. Thank you so much. I hope that's a fun, wild time up there. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.